Inside a soundproofed laboratory in Tel Aviv, a tomato plant was screaming, not in any way a human being could ever hear, not in any frequency our ears are built to register, but at 40 to 80,000 cycles per second, the plant was sending out rapid bursts of ultrasonic clicks, one after another, into the silence of the room. A nearby moth could have picked up that sound from several feet away. A bat could have caught it instantly. The human researchers, standing just inches from the plant, heard absolutely nothing. But the machines did. Ultrasonic microphones, positioned close to the stem, were capturing every single pulse. And when scientists fed those recordings into an artificial intelligence system, what came back out the other side was something that quietly unraveled centuries of assumptions about the natural world. The plant was not making noise, it was communicating. And once a machine learned to translate what it was saying, everything about how we understood the relationship between plants and human beings began to change. This is not folklore. This is not a metaphor borrowed from a fantasy film about talking trees. This is peer-reviewed science, published in respected academic journals, built on real experiments with real numbers behind them. And the picture those numbers paint is one that is genuinely difficult to shake once you have seen it. For centuries, the working assumption behind almost all of biology was simple and comfortable. Plants are passive. They sit rooted in soil, absorb sunlight, and grow. They do not feel, they do not respond. They certainly do not notice the creatures moving through their world. Under that assumption, we walked through forests without a second thought. We mowed lawns on quiet mornings and trimmed hedges with total confidence that nothing on the other end of those actions was registering what we were doing. We planted, harvested, cleared, and burned an entire kingdom of living organisms, while believing their relationship only moved in one direction. We shaped the plant world. The plant world did not shape us back. It took an artificial intelligence system trained to listen to frequencies no human ear can reach, to pull that assumption apart completely. The discovery that opened this field came out of Tel Aviv University and sent a visible shockwave through the biological sciences community the moment it was published. A team of researchers placed tomato plants, tobacco plants, wheat, cactus, and several other species inside a specially built acoustic chamber, sealed off in an isolated, soundproofed room. The equipment they used was nothing like an ordinary microphone. These were ultrasonic detectors, built to capture frequencies climbing far past the 20 kilohertz ceiling of human hearing, all the way up toward the range used by bats and moths. Then the scientists simply waited. At first, there was nothing unusual to record. But the moment they stopped watering the plants and let drought stress build up inside the tissue, the silence broke apart completely. The plants started clicking. Rapid, structured bursts of ultrasonic sound, each pulse distinct, each one apparently carrying specific information about the plant's internal condition. A thirsty tomato plant produced dozens of these clicks every hour, as sound researchers compared to the pop of bubble wrap or the crackle of popcorn. A plant that had been physically cut with scissors produced an entirely different acoustic signature, distinguishable from the sound of simple thirst. That difference is where the artificial intelligence entered the story. Researchers took all of that raw sound data and fed it into a machine learning system, training it to recognize the structural differences between the click patterns produced by different kinds of stress. Then, they tested it on recordings the system had never encountered before. The machine was able to correctly identify whether a plant was dehydrated or physically wounded with striking consistency, getting it right far more often than random chance could ever explain, and it did this using nothing but a burst of ultrasonic clicking lasting a fraction of a second. Healthy, unstressed plants stayed almost completely silent, producing barely a click an hour. The moment stress entered the picture, that silence broke apart into structured sound. That single result should stop anyone in their tracks, because it means these plant sounds are not random noise. They are structured, encoded, repeating signals that carry real information about what is happening inside the organism producing them. And they have been broadcasting into the air around every living creature on this planet for millions of years. At a volume roughly comparable to ordinary human conversation, in a frequency range our biology was simply never equipped to detect. And we're not missing background noise. We were missing an entire living language that had been playing continuously since long before our species ever stood upright. The only reason any of us know it exists now is because a machine, trained by curious researchers, finally learned to listen in a register we cannot reach. The story did not stop with detection. It moved into far stranger territory when the same Tel Aviv research group published a follow-up study confirming, for the first time in recorded science, that animals actively respond to these plant sounds. The experiment centered on female moths. When given a choice between a plant emitting rapid ultrasonic distress clicks and a healthy, silent plant nearby, the moths consistently chose the quiet one as the place to lay their eggs. They were listening. They were making a survival decision, one that would shape the fate of their next generation, based entirely on an acoustic signal produced by plant tissue that no human in the room could hear. The study was described by the researchers as the first direct evidence of acoustic interaction between plants and animals, and the implications reach far beyond a single moth species. If moths are tuning into these signals, then insects, bats, small mammals, and very possibly dozens of other species have been navigating their environments for ages by listening to information plants were broadcasting the entire time. Every living creature nearby, it turns out, was already part of the conversation. Every living creature except us. While one team of scientists was listening above ground, another discovery was unfolding beneath it, in a place we have spent decades walking over without a second thought. Researchers have known for years that trees are physically connected through vast underground fungal networks. These threads, called mycorrhizal fungi, wrap around and grow into tree root systems, spreading through the soil in strands so thin they are nearly invisible individually, yet so dense that a single teaspoon of healthy forest soil can contain miles of this fungal fiber, compressed into an underground web. People started calling the system the Wood Wide Web. For a long time, the story attached to it was almost entirely a story of generosity. Older trees sharing nutrients with struggling young seedlings, forest communities quietly supporting their weakest members through an unseen system of mutual aid running beneath entire ecosystems. That story was not wrong exactly. But once artificial intelligence was set loose on the full flow of data moving through these fungal threads, it became clear the cooperative narrative was only telling half the story, and the missing half changes the picture considerably. When a tree inside a connected network is attacked by insects, it does not simply sit there and absorb the damage. Within hours, it begins pushing specific defensive chemical compounds down through its roots and out into the shared fungal system. Machine learning models, tracking these signals with a level of timing precision no human researcher could manage by hand, found something remarkable. Trees, positioned hundreds of feet away from the original point of attack, were already producing their own defensive enzymes before a single insect had reached them. The warning had traveled underground first, arriving well ahead of the actual threat. Related research on leguminous plants found something similarly striking. When one plant in a network suffered an aphid infestation, its connected neighbors began releasing volatile compounds within a matter of hours, chemical signals specifically designed to attract the natural predators of those aphids. The plants were not only defending themselves individually, they were calling in reinforcements from across the forest. In effect, the entire network was functioning as a single coordinated defensive organism, with fungal threads serving as the communication lines and chemical signals serving as the language. Alarm system, and in certain cases, a chemical weapons delivery system, all running quietly beneath every forest floor we have ever walked across without a thought. There is more happening in that soil than chemistry alone. In a laboratory setting, one researcher watched fungal mycelium spread across a floor where wood blocks had been arranged in careful geometric patterns. The growth did not spread evenly the way a simple biological model would predict. Instead, the mycelium reached deliberately towards specific blocks, prioritized certain connections over others, and left large areas completely untouched, as though it were making decisions about where its resources were worth investing. The published conclusion was that this fungal network appeared to be demonstrating something resembling decision-making and something resembling memory. No brain, no neurons, no centralized organ processing any of this information. Just a distributed biological system making choices with a level of apparent sophistication that forced scientists to stop and reconsider what the word intelligence is actually supposed to mean. And then researchers turned their instruments towards something that made the entire conversation personal in a way underground. Fungal warfare never quite managed. Research programs spanning several years, run out of a collaboration involving MIT and the University of Cologne, asked a question most mainstream biologists would have dismissed a generation earlier as far too speculative to take seriously. Do plants respond to specific individual human beings, not to people in general as a source of warmth or carbon dioxide, but to distinguishable individuals? The team attached custom-built bioelectric sensors to plant stems and leaves and recorded the voltage patterns those plants produced while different people interacted with them over extended periods. A deep learning system processed the resulting signal data, and the results, published in peer-reviewed journals, were genuinely unexpected. The plants generated distinct, measurable bioelectric responses that correlated with specific individuals standing nearby. A machine learning model was able to correctly identify which particular person was near a given plant based purely on the plant's electrical activity, at a rate meaningfully higher than chance alone could explain. It is worth being honest about the scale of this research. It comes from a relatively small, specialized research program, not a sweeping mainstream consensus, and the accuracy involved, while statistically real, is modest rather than dramatic. But modest is not nothing. It means something in that plant tissue was picking up on the difference between one human body and another. A related study pushed the idea further, converting plant bioelectric readings into visual spectrograms and training a deep learning network to classify human emotional states purely from a plant's electrical output. That system reached a striking level of accuracy, high enough that the plant's readings appeared to track shifts in human mood with a consistency that surprised the researchers running the experiment. In the same body of work, gait-based tracking of human movement near a plant reportedly distinguished a positive mood from a negative one at a rate well above chance, based on nothing more than how a plant's electrical baseline shifted as a person walked by. None of this means the plant knows what a mood is. What it suggests is that human emotional and physical states produce subtle physiological signatures, changes in body heat, posture, breathing, and skin conductivity, and that a plant's own bioelectric system appears sensitive enough to register some of that without any deliberate awareness on the plant's part. A separate, independently published study later confirmed something a little more modest, but arguably more important. Machine learning could reliably tell the difference between plant bioelectric recordings taken while a human being was moving nearby and recordings taken in an empty room, registering that presence before any physical contact occurred. Researchers behind this line of work have proposed that this sensitivity might represent an evolved early warning system. Plants have shared their environment with large herbivorous animals for hundreds of millions of years. Detecting the approach of something capable of eating or damaging you before it physically arrives would offer a real and lasting survival advantage. The electrical field changes associated with a large moving body may be exactly the kind of environmental signal plant sensory systems evolved to pick up on. Every time you walk through a garden, something in that garden may be registering your presence, not through anything resembling thought or awareness as we understand it, but in a measurable, electrical, scientifically documented way that machine learning has now confirmed is real. Consider what all of this means once it is placed beside a health crisis already unfolding at a planetary scale. Close to a third of the world's population currently suffers from pollen-related respiratory allergies, and recent research shows that number climbing fast. Global health projections suggest that by the middle of this century, more than half of all people alive could be affected by some form of allergic reaction. Pollen seasons across North America have already stretched by several extra weeks compared to historical patterns, and airborne pollen concentrations have climbed sharply over the past 2 decades. Climate change and rising atmospheric carbon dioxide are widely understood to be the primary drivers, pushing plants to flower earlier and produce far greater volumes of pollen across longer stretches of the year. But artificial intelligence analyzing pollen chemistry at a broad geographic scale has turned up something that goes beyond simple volume. The protein structures found in pollen produced by plants under heavy environmental stress are measurably different from the pollen produced by unstressed plants, and those altered proteins tend to be more irritating to mammalian respiratory systems. When AI maps the geographic spread of these chemically aggressive pollen profiles, the pattern lines up closely with the areas where human pressure on plant life is most intense. Deforestation boundaries, industrial corridors, and the expanding edges of cities where wild plant communities are being compressed and chemically stressed by relentless development. Deep learning systems capable of distinguishing pollen types with a level of precision no human researcher could match by eye are now being used to track how these protein profiles shift as environmental pressure increases. What they are revealing is difficult to ignore. The plants under the greatest strain from human activity appear to be producing the airborne compounds most damaging to human lungs. Whether that connection reflects a genuine biological stress response or simply a byproduct of cellular damage does not change what ends up in the air every time you step outside during allergy season. Place all of these findings side by side, and the picture that forms is not an easy one to absorb. Plants produce structured ultrasonic distress signals carrying specific, decodable information, and animals make life-altering decisions based on those signals. Trees coordinate active defenses across entire forest networks through underground fungal channels that run cooperative and competitive programs through the very same pathways. Fungal networks appear capable of something resembling decision-making and memory without anything resembling a brain. Plants generate distinct bioelectric responses tied to individual human presence and, in early research, appear to track shifts in human emotional states with a level of consistency that surprised the very scientists measuring it. And the plant kingdom, under the heaviest pressure from human expansion, is producing airborne compounds that are making it measurably harder for millions of people to breathe. Artificial intelligence was built with the expectation that it would help humanity understand itself better and extend our control over the natural world. Instead, one of its most striking contributions so far has been to reveal that we were never the only active participant in our relationship with the living world around us. We assumed we were the observers, and the plant kingdom was simply the thing being observed. The evidence is now suggesting something very different. Here is one more layer to this story, reaching beyond individual laboratories and into questions about how the entire living world might be connected. When satellite-based imaging data is combined with ground-level sensor networks and processed through deep learning systems, researchers have begun noticing patterns of coordinated response across plant communities that are difficult to explain through purely local causes alone. When a major environmental event occurs somewhere on Earth, a large wildfire, a chemical spill affecting a river system, a significant deforestation event, the resulting shift in chemical and electrical activity from the surrounding vegetation does not always stay contained to that immediate area. Signals appear to ripple outward, and plant communities in connected regions begin adjusting their own chemical output in ways that track the distress happening elsewhere. This has led some researchers to propose, carefully and with real scientific caution, that the global plant biosphere may behave less like a collection of isolated ecosystems and more like a single, loosely interconnected system. To be clear, nobody serious is suggesting there is a global plant consciousness making deliberate decisions the way a human mind does. The more precise and, in some ways, more sobering idea is that the combined response of billions of interconnected organisms communicating through airborne compounds, underground fungal threads, and possibly subtle electrical fields still being studied can produce coordinated outcomes at a massive scale that no single plant is directing, but that emerge naturally from the sheer density of connections running between them. The forest is not thinking, but the forest may, in a real sense, be coordinating. And artificial intelligence is the first tool humanity has ever had that is capable of watching that coordination unfold in something close to real time, translating a scale of activity that used to be completely invisible into patterns a human mind can actually study and question. The practical consequences of this research are already being taken seriously in agriculture. If a machine learning system can identify plant stress from ultrasonic sound alone with meaningful accuracy, then building farm sensors that listen to crops. The way researchers listen to those tomato plants in a soundproofed lab becomes a realistic tool rather than a novelty. Farmers could know a field was thirsty before any visible wilting appeared. They could identify which rows were under pest pressure before the damage became obvious to the eye. The potential water savings from responding to what plants are actually signaling, rather than following a fixed irrigation schedule, could be enormous across a single growing season, multiplied across every farm on the planet. The plant kingdom, it turns out, has been broadcasting information about its own needs constantly for millions of years. Humanity simply lacked the technology to receive that broadcast. That technology exists now, and it is already moving out of research labs and into early pilot programs testing acoustic sensors on working farms. There's also a deeper reframing hiding inside all of this, one that reaches past agriculture and into the way we think about intelligence itself. For most of scientific history, intelligence was defined almost entirely in reference to brains, neurons, and centralized nervous systems. A plant, lacking all three, was automatically placed outside that category, treated as a purely mechanical organism responding to stimuli the way a thermostat responds to temperature. What artificial intelligence is now surfacing complicates that picture considerably. Coordinated defense across a forest network, apparent decision-making inside a fungal system with no brain at all, structured acoustic signaling carrying specific information, none of it requires consciousness in the way we experience it, yet all of it requires some form of information processing sophisticated enough to produce consistent, functional outcomes. Researchers remain cautious about the word intelligence precisely because it is so loaded, but the underlying observation is difficult to dismiss. Complex, adaptive, responsive behavior does not appear to require a brain. It may simply require enough interconnected biological components working together at scale, which is exactly the kind of pattern artificial intelligence is uniquely built to detect. The harder question sits outside the reach of any sensor or algorithm. If plants register the presence of individual human beings through bioelectric signals, and early research suggests they may even track shifts in human emotional states with real consistency, what does that mean for how we treat the plant world going forward? This is not a question current science is equipped to answer definitively. None of this research establishes that plants experience suffering in a way comparable to animals. It does not claim they possess consciousness, feelings, or any form of inner experience in the way we understand those words. What it does establish is that plants are dramatically more sensitive to and aware of their surrounding environment, including the human beings moving through it, than almost any prior scientific framework assumed. What we choose to do with that information sits somewhere between science and philosophy, and the data is making that question increasingly difficult to set aside. What can be said with real confidence is this: the world most of us walk through every day is not the quiet, passive backdrop we grew up assuming it was. It is active and, in certain frequencies, genuinely loud, operating through channels we only recently developed the tools to detect. Every blade of grass appears to produce some form of electrical response when something moves across it. Trees inside connected forests send chemical warnings through underground fungal threads the instant a threat is detected. Stressed plants broadcast distress signals into the surrounding air at frequencies insects, mammals, and birds have been listening to and responding to since long before humans existed. The rise in allergies affecting a growing share of the global population appears connected to chemical shifts happening inside plants placed under the greatest stress from human expansion. And a multi-year research effort has found real, if still modest, evidence that plants respond in measurable ways to individual human presence through their own bioelectric activity. Artificial intelligence did not create any of this. It did not alter the plant kingdom or change what plants were already doing. What it did was hand us for the first time the tools to finally notice what had been there all along. The language was always being spoken. The network was always running. The signals were always moving through the air and the soil around us. We simply lacked the biology to detect any of it. And now, for the first time in the history of our species, a machine has closed that gap. The question researchers, farmers, and increasingly ordinary people are being forced to sit with is no longer whether plants communicate. The evidence says they do. T is no longer whether they respond to the world around them, including us. The evidence increasingly says they do that too. The real question is what we intend to do with that awareness now that we finally have it. For most of human history, we behaved as though the living world was simply scenery, a resource to be used, a backdrop for whatever we were doing in front of it. Turns out we were never the only active participants in that scene, and we may not have even been the loudest ones. The plant kingdom has been running its own vast, ancient, and deeply interconnected communication system this entire time, in frequencies we could not hear, through channels we could not see, at a scale we are only just beginning to comprehend. We built artificial intelligence expecting it to help us dominate a silent world. Instead, it revealed that the world was never silent at all. It was speaking the whole time. And for the first time, we finally have a way to listen.